I never thought a simple envelope could make my heart skip a beat. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where stress feels like it's pressing on your chest. Work had been relentless, the constant deadlines, meetings, and phone calls leaving me exhausted. I hadn't had a real break in months. My son, ever perceptive, must have noticed. When he handed me this small, crisp envelope, he did it with that subtle grin I've seen since he was a little boy, the one that makes you suspicious even when you shouldn't be. "I got this for you," he said, voice calm, but with a trace of mischief. I set down my coffee, curiosity piqued. "What's this?"
"Open it," he said. "That's all. No hints, no jokes, just those knowing eyes that somehow always see more than I want them to." I slid my fingers under the flap and pulled out the card inside. "Relax," it read, in simple black letters. Below it, a neatly folded piece of paper slipped out. I unfolded it carefully, almost like it was fragile. And then I saw it. A cruise ticket. My heart leapt. My son had sent me on a cruise. A real, luxurious, sit back and let someone else handle everything kind of cruise. The words swirled in my head. All expenses paid, relaxing vacation, ocean views, gourmet meals. I laughed softly, disbelief mixed with excitement. After all these years of working nonstop, it felt like someone had finally pulled the emergency brake and told me to breathe. But then my eyes moved down the ticket, and the excitement stalled. It was a one-way ticket. Not a round trip. Not a vacation pass to come home after a week or two. Just one way. I blinked, staring at the text like it was a trick. Maybe a typo. Maybe my son had accidentally grabbed the wrong ticket. One way?" I asked, lifting my eyes to meet his. He nodded. Calm. Serious. Not a trace of the mischievous smirk I expected. "It's part of the gift," he said simply. I laughed, nervously at first, then a little louder. "One-way ticket, come on. That's insane." He didn't flinch. He just folded his arms and watched. Patient. Expectant. I turned the ticket over in my hands. The boarding date, the ship's name, my name printed in bold. Everything looked legitimate. Everything looked real. My stomach tightened.
I tried to joke again. "So, you just want me to move in with the crew?" He didn't answer. He didn't smile. He just tilted his head slightly and said, "It's time you really relax. No distractions. Just you, the ocean, and some time to think." I froze. The words sounded innocent enough, but the implication settled deep in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. No distractions. No deadlines. No way back. I laughed again, louder this time, shaking my head. Surely this was a joke. My son wouldn't actually. Would he? The thought was absurd. I pictured him giggling in the corner, watching me panic at the idea. But when I looked, he wasn't. His face was calm, serious, intentional. I felt my pulse quicken. He was serious. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Why a one-way ticket? What did he mean by just time to think? Was this some kind of test? Some weird psychological experiment? Or worse, had he gotten carried away with a well-intentioned plan that I wasn't ready for? The room felt smaller suddenly. The walls closed in. The envelope, once a symbol of joy, now felt like a message, a warning wrapped in a bow. I laughed again, trying to mask the growing unease. But even in that laugh, I knew it wasn't entirely humor. My son had always been clever, perceptive beyond his years, and now I realized I might have underestimated him. "I guess I'll pack," I said finally, my voice unsteady, though I forced a grin. He smiled back, just a simple, knowing smile, the kind that makes you feel like the chessboard isn't yours anymore. And in that instant, I realized the truth. This wasn't a simple gift. This wasn't a normal vacation. This was something else entirely. I laughed at first, until I realized he was serious.
The morning of the cruise, the sky was clear, the air crisp. I drove to the port with the envelope and ticket tucked carefully in my pocket, still feeling the weight of what my son had done. A one-way ticket. The thought never left me, even as I parked my car and stepped onto the bustling dock. The cruise terminal was a hive of activity. Families dragged rolling suitcases behind them. Couples laughed, pointing at the ships lined up like monuments to luxury. And there I was, feeling strangely alone. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just nerves. I had been cooped up in my office for months. This was supposed to be a gift, a chance to relax. The ocean, sunshine, gourmet meals. Time to think. Time to breathe. The boarding process was smooth, almost unnervingly so. Crew members in crisp white uniforms guided passengers with practiced smiles, checking passports, tickets, and bags. They greeted me by name before I even reached the counter. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Hastings," said a young woman, handing me my paperwork. Her smile was polite, professional, the kind that made you feel welcome, safe, comfortable. "Thank you," I said, still trying to ground myself. Inside, though, a small part of me twitched. Something felt off. The lobby of the ship was pristine. Sunlight poured through massive glass windows, glinting off polished floors and brass rails. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with the faint smell of salt air. It was exactly as luxurious as I had imagined. Relaxing. Calm. Perfect. Yet, something lingered at the edge of my perception, a subtle tension I couldn't name. I moved past families laughing in the atrium, past couples holding hands and whispering excitedly. I noticed small details. A woman in a sun hat kept glancing around, almost nervously. A man reading in the corner seemed unusually tense, gripping his newspaper so tightly his knuckles were white. The staff moved with precision, but just a little too quickly, almost too rehearsed. I shook my head. I must be overthinking it. After all, it's a cruise. Everyone's supposed to be happy. Everyone's supposed to be carefree. I approached the reception desk to collect my cabin key. The clerk smiled, extended a hand, and slid a small, rectangular key card across the counter. "Here you go, Mr. Hastings. Deck 7, cabin 702. Enjoy your stay." I picked it up, glanced down, and felt a prickle of unease. Something wasn't right. I looked closer. My name wasn't on the card, at least not the way it should have been. The label was typed in a neat, impersonal font. Guest 57, it read. No Mr. Hastings. No personal touch. I froze for a moment. A chill ran down my spine. I handed the key back, trying to smile, trying to laugh it off. "Is this a placeholder?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The clerk tilted her head, her smile unwavering, almost too perfect. "No, sir. That's your cabin key. Deck 7, cabin 702. Enjoy your cruise." I nodded slowly, took the key, and turned to walk toward the elevators. My pulse quickened. Why wasn't my name on it? Why assign me a generic number? I told myself it was probably standard protocol, a new system they were testing. Perhaps for privacy, security, or simply to avoid mistakes with so many passengers. Rational explanations. But the pit in my stomach refused to be reassured. As I rode the elevator to Deck 7, I noticed more small details. The lighting was dimmer than it should have been. The carpets, while immaculate, muffled footsteps in a way that felt almost unnatural. And the other passengers I passed in the hallways, they were polite. Almost too polite. Smiles that didn't reach their eyes. conversations that stopped abruptly when I looked in their direction. I tried to brush it off. I reminded myself this was a gift. My son wanted me to relax, to unwind. Maybe my mind was just racing because of the one-way ticket. Maybe I was imagining tension that wasn't there. I reached my cabin door, key in hand. A small, elegant plaque marked the number, 702. I slid the card into the reader. The door clicked and slid open. Inside, everything was as luxurious as the brochures promised. Plush carpet, a large bed, panoramic windows with a view of the ocean. Soft lighting, a neatly folded robe on the chair. I exhaled, letting a small part of my tension fade. For a moment, I allowed myself to think this might just be a normal vacation. Then my eyes fell on the note resting on the bedside table. A folded piece of stationery, handwriting familiar. I picked it up. My son's script. The note was brief. Relax. I'll explain everything soon. Just trust me. I set it down, heart racing. I tried to make sense of it. Trust him? How could I trust anyone right now? And then I noticed it. The cabin key, again, in my hand. My name wasn't on it. A sudden realization hit me. This wasn't just about evasion. Something else was at play. Something calculated. I laughed at first, thinking it was part of the gift's eccentricity. But the truth sank in slowly, chilling me to the
The first night
bone.
on the cruise, I
He
thought
was
I
serious.
could finally relax. I wandered the deck, feeling the gentle sway of the ship beneath my feet, the salty breeze brushing against my face. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the ocean. It should have been peaceful. It should have felt like freedom. But it didn't. It started subtly. A staff member approached me, clipboard in hand, polite but unusually precise. "Mr. Hastings," she said, glancing at the document, "welcome aboard. We'll need you to review the onboard rules before dinner. It only takes a moment." I nodded. A rules briefing. Fine. Normal. I followed her down the corridor to a small lounge. Inside, a few other passengers were seated, murmuring quietly to each other. There was a calmness to the room, but underneath it, an undercurrent I couldn't quite name. A man in a crisp uniform cleared his throat. "Welcome," he said. "This is your guide to our cruise procedures. Please listen carefully. Everyone must adhere to the schedule posted in your cabin. Disembarking at ports is not permitted without prior approval. We ask that you follow all instructions from staff without exception. Failure to comply will result in consequences." I blinked. "Excuse me, did you just say no disembarking?" He looked at me evenly, eyes professional. "Yes, sir. All excursions are prearranged. Passengers are not permitted to leave the ship independently. This is for your safety. Thank you." I chuckled nervously, shaking my head. Right, safety, of course, makes sense. Inside, though, my pulse quickened. Something about the precision in his voice, the calmness behind his words, it didn't sit right. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just standard cruise protocol, a new policy I hadn't heard of before. After all, my son had chosen this ship. He had planned this gift. Surely he wouldn't. And then my phone buzzed. A small message appeared. Sender unknown at first. I opened it, and the words made my chest tighten instantly. "Relax. It's all part of the plan." I froze. My son's words, calm and precise, floated across the screen. "Plan?" I muttered to myself, voice low. "What plan?" The staff continued their briefing, oblivious to my reaction. They moved through the rules like clockwork. Curfew times, meal schedules, assigned activities, everything, in the tiniest, most meticulous detail. It felt almost rehearsed, like I was stepping into someone else's carefully designed world. I tried to laugh again, shaking my head. "All right," I said to myself, "just a strict cruise. Nothing sinister, just structure." But then came the strange little details that made my stomach twist. Each rule had a rationale I couldn't ignore. Certain decks were off limits, assigned seating at meals, mandatory check-ins at random hours, staff always nearby but never intrusive, and every instruction carried a weight, a subtle insistence that compliance wasn't optional. I moved back to my cabin, trying to settle into the bed and convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe this was just part of the luxury cruise experience, designed to keep passengers on schedule. And yet, every part of it felt carefully engineered.
Every rule, every restriction, every glance from the staff seemed deliberate, calculated. My pulse quickened with a growing unease. I pulled out the ticket again, the envelope, the note my son had left. Relax. It's all part of the plan. I stared at those words long after reading them, feeling a mix of anger and fear. My son had orchestrated this entire voyage. The one-way ticket, the perfect timing, the selection of the ship, the rules, everything. He had designed it like a chessboard, and I was the piece being carefully guided along the path. I tried to tell myself I could trust him. I wanted to believe him. But the thought of complete restriction, no getting off the ship, no easy escape, and no clear explanation, sent a shiver down my spine. I wandered the deck again, looking at the dark water stretching endlessly into the horizon. I thought of my son. What was the purpose of all this? A lesson? A test? Or something else entirely? The gentle sway of the ship no longer comforted me. The lights, the crew, the perfectly arranged schedule, everything felt like a trap, subtle but undeniable. My sense of normalcy, the initial excitement, had begun to erode. And then it hit me. I wasn't just on a vacation. Not in the way I thought I was. This cruise wasn't a gift. Not entirely. It was a plan. Carefully constructed, and I had no idea what role I was supposed to play in it.
The first day passed almost too quickly. I wandered the decks, trying to remind myself this was supposed to be a gift. I watched the ocean stretch endlessly in every direction, sunlight sparkling off the waves, and I told myself, just relax, breathe, enjoy the ride. By the second day, the illusion of freedom began to crack. No calls from home, no messages from colleagues, though I had expected a few casual check-ins. The phone in my cabin only worked for shipboard communication. No outside lines, no internet, or at least none I could reliably access. It was isolating. I noticed the other passengers too. At first, they seemed ordinary. Families chatting over breakfast, couples strolling the promenade deck. But slowly, the patterns became clear. Whispers at corners of the hall, nervous glances toward the staff. A man in his late 50s checking his cabin door multiple times a day. Women huddled quietly in groups, speaking in low tones, pausing whenever a crew member passed by. Something about the way they moved, the tension in their posture, it was almost as if they were waiting for something, or avoiding something. I tried to shake it off. I'm being paranoid. It's a cruise. People get anxious. Maybe some are just introverted. But the unease refused to leave. Every announcement over the PA system, every perfectly timed routine from the crew, every strict adherence to rules I had barely begun to understand, it was all too precise, almost mechanical. By the third day, the weight of isolation began to press down on me. No one to talk to about the strange restrictions, no one to confirm that my unease was normal. The other passengers were polite, but their eyes avoided mine or darted nervously to the floor. One of them bumped into me in the hallway and mumbled an apology so quickly I almost didn't hear it. I caught a flash of their expression, fear, pure and undeniable, before they disappeared down the corridor. I started piecing it together. The one-way ticket, the rules I didn't know, the staff's rehearsed precision, the anxious passengers. This wasn't a regular vacation. Then it hit me. My son had orchestrated everything. This wasn't about relaxation. Not entirely. It was a test, a lesson, something he thought I needed. I wanted to be angry, to confront him immediately, but the isolation forced reflection instead. For the first time in years, I had no distractions, no work calls, no obligations, no deadlines, just time. Time to think, time to notice things I had ignored. I remembered moments from the past months, my son watching quietly while I worked late nights, the subtle comments about stress and exhaustion, the gentle nudges to take a break. I had dismissed them all. Now he had taken matters into his own hands, taken control, arranged a situation I couldn't escape from, not easily, not without confronting the reality he had designed for me. I wandered the observation deck again, staring at the endless horizon. The sun dipped lower, painting the ocean in molten gold. The beauty should have comforted me, but all I could think about was the careful orchestration behind this cruise. Every meal schedule, every announcement, every seemingly ordinary passenger, it was all part of the plan.
The whispers of the other passengers haunted me. I started listening, trying to catch fragments of their conversations. "Did you see what he did last night?" One voice murmured. "I think we're supposed to obey, just obey, obey." That word hung in the air like smoke. I didn't want to admit it, but part of me felt the same way. Isolated, trapped, in a controlled environment I couldn't fully escape from. And yet, part of me understood why my son had done it. I began to piece together motives, intentions, possible lessons. Was this about my health, my work-life balance, my relationship with him, or something deeper, something I hadn't noticed until I was forced to confront it in isolation? Every day, I wandered the ship, trying to read subtle cues, trying to understand the invisible architecture my son had built around me. The more I observed, the more I realized how meticulous he had been, how deliberate, how clever. Then, back in my cabin, as I sifted through the items he had left behind, the note, the ticket, the boarding instructions, I saw something that made my chest tighten, my hands go clammy. A small envelope tucked beneath the pillow, familiar handwriting, my son's script. The words inside were brief, but they carried weight, meaning, and an edge of urgency I hadn't felt in any of his previous messages. I unfolded it slowly, heart racing, and that's when I realized the full gravity of what he had done. This wasn't justification, it wasn't a gift, or at least not in the way I had thought. It was a plan, and I was right in the center of it. Then I found the note my son left in my cabin, and my heart sank.
The note my son left sat on the bedside table like a challenge. I stared at it, tracing the familiar handwriting with my eyes, trying to make sense of the words. "Relax. You'll understand soon. Just trust me." But understanding was elusive. I had spent days wandering the decks, observing passengers, noticing patterns, piecing together the strange, meticulous design of this voyage. Now, alone in my cabin, it was time to dig deeper. I pulled out my phone, the limited shipboard model, and opened the messages he had sent earlier. Carefully, deliberately, each one hinted at something larger. "You'll thank me," one read. "Just follow the plan." I replayed everything in my head. The one-way ticket, the rigid rules, the anxious passengers, the staff's almost eerie obedience, and my son, calm, collected, in control of the entire situation without me even realizing it. And then it hit me. This cruise wasn't about relaxation. It was about protection. A flood of memories surged through me, small details I had overlooked for months, arguments at home I thought were minor, moments of tension I'd brushed off as teenage rebellion. My son's subtle warnings, his questions about my late nights, about who came and went from our house. It all started to make sense. Somewhere along the line, my son had realized I was vulnerable, not physically, but emotionally. Vulnerable to distraction, to danger I hadn't even noticed. Perhaps someone was watching. Perhaps the cruise was his way of keeping me safe, of removing me from the equation, of creating a controlled environment where nothing could go wrong. I imagined him planning this, studying cruise lines, tickets, schedules, staff rosters, passenger manifestos. He had thought about every detail, anticipated every risk, every reaction, and then, calmly, confidently, he had set it in motion. The pieces fell into place. The strict rules weren't arbitrary. The passengers weren't just other vacationers. Some were friends, trusted allies, part of the plan. The isolation, the subtle tension, the strict adherence to schedule. It wasn't cruelty. It was careful orchestration. I sank into the chair by the window, watching the waves glint in the afternoon sun, and for the first time in days, I understood. My son had orchestrated this cruise not to trap me, but to protect me, to teach me, to force me to pause, to see, to notice what I had been missing. And yet, the revelation brought as much unease as relief. Protection came at a cost. Isolation came at a cost. Control, even by someone I trusted implicitly, came at a cost. I remembered the whispers in the hallways, the nervous glances, the subtle patterns among the passengers. Now I understood. They weren't strange or suspicious. They were participants in the plan, carefully maintaining the illusion to ensure I didn't panic, didn't try to escape. Every rule, every restriction, every small discomfort I had felt was intentional, each designed to push me, to guide me, to test me, and perhaps to teach me a lesson about trust, about letting go, about noticing what mattered most. I opened the note again, reading the words over and over,
"Relax, you'll understand soon. Just trust me." He had been patient, confident I would figure it out in my own time. He had trusted me to see what he saw, and I had failed. Until now, a knot formed in my chest. Gratitude, awe, fear, they all tangled together. I realized how clever, how resourceful, how determined my son truly was, and suddenly I felt small, humbled by his foresight. I paced the cabin, letting the understanding sink in. The cruise wasn't a vacation, it was a carefully constructed intervention, a controlled escape from a world I hadn't realized was slipping past me. He had given me the gift of perspective, of clarity. And then, as I looked out at the endless horizon, the sun dipping low over the water, I felt a chill. Something still lingered, unresolved. Something I couldn't see. Something my son hadn't, or perhaps couldn't, explain. I had figured out the method, the reasoning, the careful orchestration. I understood the lesson. I understood the protection. But there was one thing I still didn't know. One question remained, sharper than the ocean wind whipping against the deck. I stared out at the endless expanse of water, heart pounding, mind racing. The pieces had aligned, the truth revealed itself. Yet the final crucial detail, the one that could change everything, still eluded me. Everything made sense, except the one thing I still didn't know. And that one thing was waiting for me, somewhere on this ship.
The final morning on the cruise dawned quietly, the sky painted in soft shades of pink and gold. I stood at the railing, watching the sun rise over the endless horizon, the gentle sway of the ship beneath my feet feeling almost like a heartbeat. Slow, steady, constant. After days of tension, isolation, and revelation, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. The realization of what my son had orchestrated, the rules, the strict schedules, the passengers, the isolation, had finally settled in. I wasn't just returning from a vacation, I was returning from a carefully constructed lesson. I walked to my cabin one last time, noting the small details I had overlooked before, the neatly folded robe on the chair, the note my son had left under the pillow, the cabin key that had seemed so ominous at first. Each small thing had been part of a plan to make me see what I hadn't before, to force me to pause in a life that had moved far too quickly. The ship's crew greeted me warmly as I prepared to disembark. Their smiles were no longer unnerving, no longer rehearsed. They had served their purpose, quietly guiding me through the steps my son had set out, ensuring my journey was safe, controlled, and ultimately transformative. Stepping onto the dock, I felt the sunlight differently than I had before. It wasn't just warmth, it was clarity. Every step away from the ship carried with it a sense of gravity and reflection. The world I had returned to would never feel the same. I had been challenged, tested, and protected in ways I hadn't realized were necessary. I thought about my son, alone, calm, observant, and yet bold enough to orchestrate this entire voyage. He had seen what I couldn't, my constant stress, my inability to step back, my relentless drive for work, for achievements, for results. He had taken control of the situation to force me to confront the truth about myself. I remembered the look on his face when I had first opened the one-way ticket. Expectation, confidence, a hint of mischief. He had trusted me to survive, to reflect, to learn, and now he had proven that even without being physically present, he could guide me towards something essential, awareness. The drive home after being picked up from the cruise port was quiet. I barely spoke, instead letting my thoughts drift, piecing together the lessons of the past week. Trust, yes, but also perspective, letting go, observing instead of controlling, being present instead of reacting. I thought about the small moments with him before the cruise, the evenings he had tried to speak with me about school, about life, about being more mindful. I had brushed them aside, distracted by meetings and deadlines, by obligations I thought were paramount. But now, I understood. Those moments weren't interruptions. They were warnings, gentle nudges I had ignored. Arriving home, the house felt different, not because it had changed, but because I had. I walked through the rooms, noticing small details, his toys neatly arranged, the subtle marks of his presence, and I realized that parenting wasn't about control. It wasn't about always being the one in charge. It was about observation, about listening, about trusting that sometimes
The wisdom of a child could surpass that of a parent. When I finally saw him, waiting with a tentative smile, I felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. I knelt down and embraced him, realizing fully that the cruise, the tension, the isolation, the lessons, had been his way of communicating something words could never convey. He had crafted a journey not just across the ocean, but through my own blind spots, forcing me to see him and myself differently. We sat together in the quiet living room, and for the first time in years, I listened without distraction. His words were simple, but their impact profound. I wanted you to see, Dad, to slow down, to notice, to be here. It wasn't punishment, it wasn't manipulation, it was love. And I understood then what he had been trying to teach me all along. Life wasn't just about achievements, deadlines, and control. It was about presence, observation, trust, and the courage to let go. The house no longer felt ordinary. The day no longer felt ordinary. I had returned not just from a cruise, but from a journey into understanding, into empathy, into patience, into awareness. As I watched him play quietly, the realization struck me fully. The vacation had been a cover, a vessel for a lesson. I hadn't needed the ocean, the luxury, or the isolation. I had needed the clarity, the opportunity to see him and myself in a new light. I sat back, exhaling slowly, a weight lifting from my shoulders. I finally understood. I had thought I went on a cruise to relax, but my son taught me how to really live.